Irish literature. Ireland has 10,000 years of human history and a long literary tradition. One important aspect of Irish history is that Ireland was settled by ongoing invasion, with the first settlers having come from Britain around 8000 BCE. Waves of invasions occurred thereafter, including the Gaels in about 100 BCE, whose language remained dominant until the British imposed English in the 19th century. Some 500 years later, in 432 CE, missionary St. Patrick began converting the pagan kings to Catholicism, another kind of invasion that had lasting impact on Irish people. When Rome fell, the Irish monasteries were so strong that they provided support to monasteries throughout Europe. Monks transcribed Irish history and produced illuminated works such as the Book of Kells, a version of the Gospels. Vikings began invading in 791, and Normans from England in 1170. With time, the invaders integrated into Irish society. English came to Ireland seeking wealth and lands and less control by the English monarchy. Elizabeth I brought the Irish kingdoms under her control, importing true English lords and soldiers to enforce her hierarchy. This seizure of power laid the foundation of the long-lasting dispute between Ireland and England over Irish home rule. The British invasion of Ireland involved settling Protestants in Ireland and confiscating Catholic land. The Catholics rebelled in 1641, at which time 59% of Irish land was Catholic-owned. By 1695, after the Catholics were defeated at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, Catholics owned only 14% of Irish land. This number dropped further to 7% by 1714. Penal laws deprived Catholics of rights, and those were rights such as voting and where they could live and so forth. In 1800, the Act of Union abolished the Irish Parliament and made Ireland part of the British Empire. Despite ongoing resistance, it wasn't until 1886 that Prime Minister Gladstone introduced the Home Rule Bill that would make Ireland able to rule itself. And it was not until 1921 that the Republic of Ireland achieved independence, and part of that deal involved leaving Northern Ireland part of the United Kingdom. Given this long history, it should be obvious that written Irish literature has existed in Gaelic and Latin since the time of St. Patrick, and oral literature since long before that. My own experience with Irish literature focuses on literature in English since the 18th century, and I want to call attention to writers often subsumed in British literature, that is, made part of our textbook, who are actually Irish or produced their writing while living in Ireland. And you may recognize some of these names. I'll just highlight Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, our own Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, George Bernard Shaw, who wrote Pygmalion, on which the musical My Fair Lady was based, and another famous one, Mrs. Warren's Profession. In fact, all of his plays are fantastic. And Oscar Wilde, who wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray and the play The Importance of Being Earnest. And then, of course, we'll be reading poetry by Yeats this term, and he's part of what's considered to be the Irish Revival, which also involved Lady Gregory, as well as the playwrights Synge and O'Casey, and James Joyce, author of Dubliners and Ulysses, Samuel Beckett, who wrote Waiting for Godot and Endgame, and the poet Seamus Heaney. Some Irish literature responds directly to Irish politics. For example, Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal criticizes the Protestant elite in Ireland by satirically suggesting the Irish sell their children as food. And writers of the Irish literary revival sought to value Irish folktales and Irish nationalism. For these texts, postcolonial theory provides a helpful literary lens. Postcolonial theory analyzes the effect of the colonial experience on characters, authors, and readers. It assumes that we live in a culture where nations have been and are being dominated to their detriment, that such domination can devastate not only economics and politics, but also culture, including literature, and that part of the recovery process involves using literature to rebuild national identity. Ireland, like America, is a former British colony. Unlike America, Ireland has not become a global power. Moreover, Northern Ireland remains part of the British Empire, so Irish people have had to deal with the continuing occupation of their land. Irish literature could be said to respond to the complexities of the post-colonial experience. For instance, imperialism affects literature by privileging the languages, literary styles, literary traditions, plots, and heroes of those in power. And of course, as was noted during the previous discussion, English was imposed on Ireland in the 19th century, and so writing in English can be problematic for colonial peoples because it means they are taking on the voice of the dominator. And of course, literary styles and literary heroes and literary traditions coming from the dominating culture can be problematic because, again, they've been imposed. They are not chosen. They're not part of the heritage of the people. And there are ways in which literature has a reciprocal effect on imperialism by reinforcing the values of those in power, representing the powerful as good and the less powerful as evil, ensuring a market for literature written in the language of the powerful, that is English in this case, and silencing the languages and literary traditions of those without power. In response to the effects of colonization on literature, post-colonial literature tends to both accept and reject the influence of the dominating imperialist literature in its history. While authors may choose to use some of the genres and languages of that dominating influence, especially if they wish to attract a global readership, that is, it's easier to publish in English because there are more people that speak it, therefore more people who will buy the book. These authors may also play with those genres and languages, intentionally resisting expectations to demonstrate the power of their own tradition and to teach outsiders about their tradition. And we'll see this in particular intentionally with Yeats, but we might also want to take a look at Dracula as an example of response to colonialism and the colonial experience. In a sense, post-colonial literature written in English writes back to its colonial legacy.